So welcome to our webinar. We are going to cover how to manage uncomfortable emotions. So we'll go into some specific techniques and we will cover the utility of emotions, why do we have emotions, and then we'll have some time for questions. So if you look down in the chat, Dr. Thusla Malani Virchi actually just left a little message saying that if you have any questions, you can send it directly and it'll come to us at the end. So ask as many questions as you want. There's no dumb question, and we hopefully will be able to answer everything. Okay, are my slides working? Yes, great. So who am I? So my name is Alessia Caputo. I am a registered psychotherapist with qualifying status, and I'm also completing my Master of Psychology at Adler right now, and I'm a practicum student at Silm Center for Mental Health.
Hi everyone, my name is Atrzadeh. I am in my final year of my Master's of Psychology at Adler Professional Graduate School, and I'm also a practicum student at Silm Center for Mental Health.
Okay, so first I thought we'd open up with talking about why we actually have emotions. So what is the purpose of them? So emotions have utility. There's a reason why we have them. They help us express our needs and assist us in attaining and getting those needs. So having emotions helps communicate what is purposeful or harmful to us. Emotions can be communicated verbally and non-verbally, so you can pick up non-verbally just by looking at someone's behaviors, their facial expressions, what they might be feeling. If you know anything about microexpressions, that's part of nonverbals as well. And emotions really help us understand our world and our needs within the world. So how we're feeling in that moment and what we need from others, connection, someone to hear us out, listen to us.
First and foremost, we want to acknowledge that uncomfortable emotions are completely normal. At one point or another, I'm sure all of us have probably felt an uncomfortable emotion, whether it was anger, sadness, fear, even happiness. Sometimes those can be uncomfortable emotions for many of us. A lot of the time, stressful events and life stressors can actually make our uncomfortable emotions arise even more. And in most instances, they can actually intensify them. So especially right now during this pandemic, a lot of us are probably going through a lot of uncomfortable emotions, especially with all the uncertainty. But knowing that we're all experiencing these uncomfortable emotions at one point or another can sometimes bring comfort, as we know that we're all experiencing them and that it's normal to experience them. Usually our first instinct that happens when we have these uncomfortable emotions is to perhaps avoid them. By trying to avoid these uncomfortable emotions, we may end up engaging in what's called experiential avoidance, and that's when we try to avoid or eliminate these really uncomfortable emotions or thoughts. One way to participate in avoidance is by participating in activities that can help you avoid those emotions. So this is to say things like that may not be actually of benefit to us. So maybe not talking to someone that we're having issues with, or just trying to avoid anything going on. But what can happen is that you will experience a trade-off, and this can actually lead to some mental health symptoms such as depression and anxiety. And so trying to avoid or run away from these hard emotions and thoughts can limit our abilities in living the life that we want. So we kind of want to show everyone today some techniques and some ways of dealing with these tough emotions, and we hope that they'll aid you better in sitting with them. And so these techniques that we'll be introducing to you today come from two different modalities. The first one is called ACT, so acceptance and commitment therapy, and the next one is called dialectical behavioral therapy, also known as DBT. So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to look at letting go of the struggle. So first and foremost, we want to kind of explore from the ACT modality one of the ways to drop that struggle dropping that struggle with that difficult emotion. And one way to do that is with the push away paper exercise. And actually, this is something that we can all do right now. You don't have to have a piece of paper with you. If you have, let's say, a pen or even your phone, you can do this while I'm doing this exercise with you right now. For the purpose of this, you do want to try to use a piece of paper. It can be any size. And what you're going to do is you're going to push this piece of paper or your phone or a pen as far as you can away from you, as far away as you can from you. And then what you're going to do is you're going to think of this piece of paper as a very uncomfortable feeling or emotion. It could even be a thought or memory, anything that's really hard for you right now. And so I'm holding this piece of paper from both sides of the end and I'm pushing it away as far as I can. So if you're doing this with your phone or a pen, you're going to feel some tenseness just by pushing it away. And you want to make sure that your arms are straight and that they're being pushed as far and far away as you can. What you want to do is you want to kind of look past that object that you're pushing away, and you want to see kind of what could be there that's being blocked by this piece of paper or object. And that could be possibly, things that matter to you, such as a family member, your partner, places or things that you want to do. This piece of paper or object that you're holding and pushing so far away as hard as you can, it's really distracting you from it. While I'm pushing this, and while you are too, I want you to try to notice three things. The first thing I want you to notice is the amount of energy that it takes for you to push this piece of paper or object away. You want to then notice how distracting it is, right? If I'm trying to look beyond this piece of paper and realize what's going on in my life, it's pretty hard to kind of concentrate on, let's say, my partner, if I have a child, my favorite book. I'm not able to give it all my full attention because all my energy and focus is on this piece of paper that I'm trying to push away. The next thing that I want to notice is how hard is it to push this piece of paper away? I haven't been even holding it for a minute and I'm already getting a little tired from pushing it away, but it's quite exhausting. And if I'm doing this, how am I able to give any attention to things such as any day-to-day problems, like let's say financial issues, career worries, relationship issues, whether they be familial, romantic, interpersonal, but also even I really don't have any energy to do any of my day-to-day tasks, right? Cooking food, brushing my teeth. I'm really going to be left with no energy if all my energy is being used to push this piece of paper away. And so noticing that these difficult emotions are kind of, this paper is almost a metaphor for that, can help us realize that how hard it is when you're trying to push those hard, tough, difficult emotions away from you. Now, one thing I want to do now is relax my arms and put this piece of paper or object on my lap. And as you can see, I'm a lot less tense and I'm a lot more relieved from having this piece of paper on my lap. Now, this isn't to say that it's not to say that this object has magically disappeared or that these uncomfortable emotions that I'm going through have disappeared, but I've kind of found a new way to manage them. And I'm kind of taking back that energy and I'm more relieved and I'm more able to do the things that matter to me the most and to live the life that I want to. So it's important to note that, of course, these difficult emotions aren't going to just disappear by putting them on your lap. But what you're able to do is you're better able to focus on the things that matter to you the most, while kind of engaging in some self-compassion, and then you're better able to address those difficulties that you're having. So now we're going to look at some diffusion strategies. So that last technique was a great one, but there's also sometimes some things that we can do, such as just fusion strategies. And these strategies will teach us how to detach from our uncomfortable thoughts and emotions. And this allows us to respond more flexibly and unhook from those difficult feelings and contemplations. So we want to first explain what is fusion and what is diffusion. So cognitive fusion occurs when your thoughts control and impact your behaviors and emotions in a problematic manner. So sometimes we'll try to avoid doing things and because they're so difficult, but sometimes we will engage in things that aren't really beneficial to us. A lot of these times when we have these negative thoughts and feelings, they can hook us and in turn cause us to do things that don't really align with our values. So diffusion, on the other hand, is what we can do when we want to disengage from those distressing feelings or emotions. And engaging in diffusion can actually allow us to be more flexible with our thoughts, can allow us to detach from those negative thoughts and feelings. And it can also allow us to notice what our mind is trying to tell us. Which is great. So we're going to actually look at diffusion through anchoring. And so anchoring is basically what helps you remain grounded and centered when you're having these tough emotions and thoughts. And we're going to talk about 3 ways that you can achieve that on the next slide. We're going to show you through noticing and naming, which would be the first step. So the first step in engaging in anchoring is to ask yourself this question. What is my mind trying to tell me? When I'm having these tough emotions and these tough thoughts, what is my mind trying to say to me in this moment? And we want to kind of identify these thoughts that are attached to these difficult emotions. We then want to acknowledge that difficult emotion and that uncomfortable feeling by naming it. So it might be anger that you're feeling, it might be grief or numbness, but by giving it a name, we're able to take it a step further and normalize that feeling, to tell yourself that it's normal to feel this way. And in this moment, by doing that, we're actually able to unhook from this difficult emotion. And as much as we want the emotion to disappear, it won't. But by unhooking, it gives us a bit more freedom. The next thing that you want to do with this first step is you want to try and identify what you're feeling in your body. And you may actually ask yourself, do I have space to kind of explore this further? And if you are able to explore that a little further, we want to work towards allowance. We want to allow ourselves to feel these feelings and to be curious about them. And that way we can help ourselves sit with them a lot better instead of just trying to avoid them and push them away. The next thing that you want to do is you want to work towards accommodating, which is when you're opening yourself up to these feelings so that you can work towards acceptance. And finally, what we can do is once we've kind of done these steps in the first part, we're working towards acceptance, which is basically at the forefront of neutralizing those really tough emotions that we may be feeling. So the next step in anchoring is connecting. So the human body actually acts as a vessel for these uncomfortable emotions. And some ways you can help manage these tough feelings in your body is by connecting with it. So in moments where you're feeling really overwhelmed with these uncomfortable emotions, sometimes we kind of don't think about what's going on in our body, but we want to kind of go back to that simply by noticing that you have control over your body, that it's movable. It can really help you take claim of it back. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to straighten your posture, which I'm going to do right now. And you're going to slowly start noticing each part of your body. So you're going to start at your legs and your feet, and you're going to move up to your chest, and then you're even going to go to your arms, and then your hands, and then even your fingers. And you maybe even want to gently move them and just stretch them out and start realizing that I have control over my own body, and it can help you unhook from those thoughts and those really negative feelings. And the last part, which you can't see obviously, is that you want to push your feet into the ground. And that's just engaging in that anchoring that we're trying to get you to do in order to act in diffusion. And finally, the final part of anchoring is engaging. So you want to engage in the world around you. When we're sitting with these uncomfortable emotions and we have all these emotions going on around us, it's really hard to engage with what's going on in the world. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to kind of recognize that you have these senses that can help you engage back with the world. So seeing, touching, hearing, tasting. Things that you can do, for example, would be to notice 5 things in your room. So I have a computer, my phone, a picture of a loved one, just noticing and seeing those 5 things. The next thing that you want to do is you want to list off 4 sounds. So I'm in front of a window, so I hear cars, I hear birds. Even if I open the window, I hear the wind. So just trying to hear some noises can really help you engage in your senses. And we're not saying this that, by doing these things, you're going to be avoiding what's going on, but instead you're reconnecting and re-engaging with what matters the most to you. And that's your environment and what's going on in your life. But by doing these acts, these 3 steps, it can really help you diffuse from those uncomfortable emotions and instead help you feel a lot more secure in what's going on.
Okay, now I'm going to jump on and talk about mindfulness and a technique called leaves on a stream. So this is something that I would say to do when you have a little bit more time. I would allow yourself 5 to 15 minutes, depending on how long you want to engage in this for. And if you want to even close your eyes right now or keep them open, up to you, you can get a little sample of what leaves on a stream would entail. So it's essentially sitting in a comfortable position. You can plant your feet on the floor, not your hands, and your hands comfortably in your lap. You can lay down. You can do this whatever serves you best. And visualize yourself sitting beside a gently flowing stream with leaves floating along the surface of the water. So every time a thought enters your mind, you want to place it on a leaf and just watch that leaf float away. So you're separating yourself from the thought that's coming and watching it float away on the water. And so you should do this with every thought, even positive or enjoyable, happy thoughts and unpleasant ones. The whole point is to connect back to yourself in your body physically and to separate, like what Mona was saying, so get rid of the fusion and engage in more diffusion techniques. So if your thoughts stop, which they might, watch the stream until they start again. Sometimes our minds can just go blank. And if a leaf gets stuck, which it also might, Allow it to float around until it's ready to pass. And so something you can say to yourself, like what Mona was speaking to about the naming piece before, is to say, I'm notice myself having the thought that blank. So whatever's coming up for you. It could be that this is stupid, that this is really strange. Maybe it's feelings of frustration because the same thought keeps coming up or getting stuck. So noticing that you're having the thought, and the more you're separating by noticing, the easier it'll be and the faster the leaf will eventually float away. So again, some thoughts might hook you. That is totally normal. I think this happens to me every single time that I do this, and having a thought hook you is totally normal. But the goal is to refocus back to the present moment. If you can do this visually in your head, you can find online, there's lots of guided meditation tapes that have leaves on a stream. Another version of it is clouds floating by as well. So whatever visualization works best for you, you can definitely try out. And so Mona spoke about ways to manage uncomfortable thoughts and to kind of sit with them as they come up and maybe even welcome that they're happening. So distress tolerance is another way to do that, but more so when things are just too much. So when we can't really just sit with things, when we need to use distraction and engage in something different than what we've been doing to just get through the emotion. So with distress tolerance, I'm going to cover something called TIP techniques. Okay, so the acronym TIP just stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, impaired muscle relaxation. Okay, and so these are based in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapies, specifically the tenet of distress tolerance. So what I want to cover is something called the wise mind. So when you're feeling dysregulated or when you're feeling like these intense emotions are coming up, your ability to think is going to be diminished. Your body is preparing for fight or flight. It's deciding whether it's going to act in the moment, whether it's going to retreat, and you're not centered in what DBT would call your wise mind. So if you look at the little Venn diagram here, your reasonable mind and emotional mind intersect to create the wise mind. So your reasonable mind, it's pretty much what it says. It's driven by logic and rationality, whereas your emotional mind is the mind, that part of you that's driven by feelings. And so the wise mind is the nice middle ground that you have when the two are working together. And so these distress tolerance techniques will help you get to that point where you're in the wise mind and you're going to be thinking more about long term. You might not say something that later you'll regret, or you might not act in a way that is not congruent with how you want your life to be long term. Okay, so the first T, or the first part of the acronym is the T, so temperature. And the goal here is to ground yourself and refocus to the present moment using cold. Everything I will talk about in terms of this TIP acronym is helping you get back into your body. A lot of the time when we are feeling dysregulated or we're feeling super intense emotions and can't seem to calm down or can't seem to just stay present, we are not conscious or we're not aware about what's going on physically for us. So these are things that'll help you all ground back to your body and get you into what we were saying about the wise mind. So a couple of techniques that you could use for temperature, these are just a few. And again, like we were saying, they might not all work for you. And a technique that you use might work in one instance and maybe not in another, but these are just some of them. So one is to use an ice pack. Again, this might be something that you would do at home. It might not be accessible when you're out in public, but you would hold the ice pack on your face, your forehead, or even the back of your neck works nicely, and do it for 30 seconds or as long as you want. And you can close your eyes when you do this. Another way to use the cold or temperature is to have an ice cube and hold it in your hand and focus on the physical sensation. So it becomes very hard to focus on any intense emotion when you're feeling that physical, I wouldn't say it's pain, but it is quite like consuming of your attention. Another thing you could do if you're out is to take a brisk walk in the cold. This might not be accessible in the coming summer months, but I mean, being in Canada, this might be something that you can do during the year. Of course, you don't want to get sick, so keep your coat on. Or you could take a cold shower. So just a quick cold shower. You don't want it to be so cold and you're in there for so long that your body temperature becomes dysregulated, but it's a nice way to have that temperature help you ground back into your physical body. And you're definitely going to be aware of what's going on physically when you come out of a cold shower. Okay, so the I stands for intense exercise, which is really useful for kind of getting rid of energy that may be charging intense emotions. Especially I find this is useful for anxiety and anger, because they are pretty intense and help be diminished with exercise. So the goal here is to exhaust yourself and bring awareness again back to your body. Some examples I thought of were fast-paced walking, short sprints, or even doing some jumping jacks. It might sound a little ridiculous thinking about doing these. Even I think about, okay, am I going to really engage in short sprinting? And I would if it would work. So this is something that you could try out. It might not be for you. And the intense exercise piece is good, again, for the emotions that are charged by intense emotions. And it's hard to stay stuck in intense emotional states when you are physically exhausted. So that's why the goal is to just exhaust the body here and bring you back into the body by doing that. Okay, the first P and tip is called paced breathing. Again, helps you stay grounded, get present with your physical body, helps you alleviate the intensity of emotions, can help. I find this is really useful for ruminating thoughts, racing thoughts. If you have lots of anxiety and you feel that you just can't settle, this would be a really good exercise for you too. It'll regulate your heart rate, and you can do this cycle as much as you want. So I have a little infographic here that is on something called box breathing. So box breathing is when you're essentially making a box as you breathe. So you can engage in this right now if you want to keep your feet planted to the ground, and I will just read it out to you. So the first step is to inhale for a count of 4. So close your eyes and breathe in through your nose slowly. Inhale fully into your lungs and your abdomen. Keep a count of 4. Once you get there, you hold for 4 counts and keep your lungs full with air. And on the exhale, exhale your breath slowly for a count of 4, expelling the air from your lungs and your abdomen. And when you finally let out all the air, hold your breath and count to 4 while you keep your lungs empty. And so sometimes when I do this, I like to even draw in the air myself a little square, and it helped me visualize and ground to the moment. And this is something that you can do as many times as you wish. It might take maybe 10 rounds of this before you feel a little more calm, a little more regulated and centered. It might take a couple minutes. It definitely depends on the situation, but it's just another tool that you can pull out that might work for you. And the last P in the distress tolerance tip acronym is paired muscle relaxation. And if this sounds strange to you, you might have heard something called progressive muscle relaxation, which is basically the same thing. The focus on them is to tense and release various muscle groups throughout the body. And by vigorously tensing and then letting go, you're becoming more aware of the tension that you're actually holding on to, and then discharging that at the same time. So it's really nice if you feel really tense, super anxious, or just very stressed out, any kind of intense emotion like that. This might be one that you would need a little bit more time for as well, especially if you want to do a full scan of the body. So maybe 5 to 15 minutes, depending on how long you want to engage in this for. And so some of the parts of the body to do are your neck or shoulders, chest, arms, abdomen, legs, feet, and your facial muscles. So that one I find is really interesting because I think sometimes we don't pay attention, or we might not even have an awareness of how much tension we can hold in places like our jaw, right? So think about, even if you are someone who grinds your teeth or clenches your jaw really tight, this would be good for you. So that active tensing and then letting go. And again, if you don't want to do this by yourself, there's lots online where you can get like a guided meditation, a guided muscle relaxation to help you tense one at a time and let go. So the goal here is to have that awareness of the tension, bring yourself back into the physical body, and require some mindfulness because you're having to sit in the present moment. And so it's helping you detach from that intense emotion. And again, these are the techniques that are when things are too much, right? So the ones that Mona talked about are maybe more to help ground you in the moment where you can welcome that uncomfortable or unpleasant emotion in. And the distress tolerance part is when things are too much, we need to just kind of stop, and then we can get back from there.
Just some concluding remarks. As Alessia kind of mentioned, you want to try each of these techniques and see which one serves you best. With different emotions, obviously different things will work. So it's a bit of trial and error and seeing kind of what best works for you. And also sometimes, we have different emotions arising at the same time. And so you want to really try to address one emotion at a time. That way you'll be more optimal in kind of working with it and kind of helping you sit better with that emotion. being able to sit with these uncomfortable emotions obviously is not easy, and it takes time and practice, but it can really help you foster a meaningful life, and can help you with kind of de-stressing more with everything going on in your life. And lastly, the most important thing is that you're trying to gain back control. A lot of the times these really distressing thoughts and emotions can take control of our thoughts and behaviors. And so by engaging in some of these techniques that we kind of discussed, they can really help you take back that control. And that way you're better able to engage with your life.
Mhm. Another important thing I would say to note too is that these are all techniques that are important to try when you're even feeling okay, you're not feeling dysregulated or any kind of intense emotion. And I think that's because you'll be able to see, okay, how do I actually engage in this activity for one? And two, you can see the benefit of how good you feel after. And that's a nice way to kind of cherry pick which ones might work for you, and which ones you think, okay, maybe that one's not for me, maybe that's for a different type of situation. But practicing them and trying them out for the first time before a big situation, or really when you're feeling that like wave of emotion come, is really beneficial to actually getting the best benefit or reward from the techniques.
And Alessia and I want to thank you so very much for joining us today, taking some time and joining us in this webinar. Like we kind of mentioned, we are part of Salem Center for Mental Health, and what's great is we have a wonderful team that provide therapy services. And right now, it's a tough time for a lot of us. So if you know someone or yourself, you want to talk to somebody, you can always reach out to us either by email or by phone. We also have a sliding scale, and we're looking to help whoever needs it at this time in our support. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to answer them.
Oh,
I have a question here. Sometimes people feel like they wish they didn't have emotions at all. What are some reasons why we have these uncomfortable emotions?
oh, okay, I'll take that one, Mona. So I think we have a variety of emotions. So some reasons why we have uncomfortable ones are, if you think about evolutionarily, emotions are what helped us in the past to sense out if there's any fear. And so that kind of gut feeling where you're like, oh, things maybe don't feel so good right now, evolutionarily has helped us to understand when fear is coming or when to expect something not so good happening. So they're totally normal to have them. And it's also totally normal to not want to have them because they just don't feel good. But evolutionarily, and I mean, there's been a reason for them.
Yeah, exactly. To go off of what Alessia said, they serve a great purpose to us. Kind of what Alessia touched up on one of the first slides is that, they have a purpose. So sometimes they'll relate to us when things are good, when things are scary, when things are tough. And so it's not only verbally are we kind of understanding them by people. Sometimes they'll tell us, I don't feel so great today, but sometimes we'll even see it non-verbally, and so they can even help us with other individuals in our relationships if they're not doing too well, if they're having a bad day. And so they act as a guiding tool almost, as much as they do kind of guide ourselves, but they can also help us with our relationships with other individuals as well.
Are there some emotions that would be considered unhelpful to experience?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on, is it appropriate for the situation? Or I would say it's unhelpful if it's really overwhelming to you, if it's like affecting you every single day, or in ways that are really big and overwhelming in your life. I would say maybe it's not helpful, but I don't know. Do you mean unhelpful in the sense that like it's not serving any purpose for you, or unhelpful that it's uncomfortable?
More so that it's not serving a purpose for you, potentially.
Oh, I don't know, Mona, do you want to grab that one?
I think one, oh, sorry, go, no, please.
So I think one of the things, I think, Alessia, you hit it spot on, in that sometimes when our emotions can feel overwhelming, that's a time in which they tend to become unhelpful, not because they're wrong, but because we can no longer manage with them, right? But what they're communicating to us is generally still accurate to some extent, because it's how we feel. We feel how we feel, and that's never wrong. So just the way you said, it's normal to have any kind of emotion. It's also valid to have any kind of emotion, even when it doesn't fit the situation. However, sometimes what happens is that we judge our emotions. So we have what we call primary emotions, and that's our initial reaction to a situation. So for example, I stub my toe on the bed, and my first kind of reaction is pain and potential threat. But then I get really mad at this inanimate bed, and then I'm angry with myself. That would be a secondary emotion. And then I feel ashamed that I got mad at the bed that didn't actually do anything, and that's another secondary emotion. And so sometimes what happens is we end up judging our emotional experience. Other times that we might experience that is when we're experiencing sadness or grief, and then we laugh. And that might be then we might judge the laughter, or judge those moments of happiness because they seem inappropriate. And so ideally what we would do is always accept our emotions for what they are and recognize that they're always valid. The moment we start judging them or thinking that they're wrong or inappropriate, we're actually just making our lives a lot more difficult. And we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to experience the full range of that emotion, and to take the time to understand why we're experiencing it that way. That's all. I'm gonna hide my face again, and we have one more question here. So what can I do if I'm feeling really, really overwhelmed with my emotions, and the way I would usually cope with it is not helpful to me?
Okay, that's a good question. I think it kind of, I would say it ties in with what I was saying kind of at the end, where not every coping strategy, or I guess distraction technique, or whatever you want to call it, even if it's your go-to one, it might not work in any given moment, just depending on the situation. And that can be so frustrating and upsetting and dysregulating, and even make us feel even worse in that moment. And kind of like what you were saying before, Taslim, about the self-judging piece, right? So that might make the situation even bigger or more overwhelming or intense than it already was. So that's why I like to present or have lots of different coping skills, because it might be that something else would be more beneficial. I think another good thing too is to connect. If connecting with someone and asking someone to help ground you and co-regulate you is part of your one of your coping skills, and if you feel safe with someone, I would definitely ask someone to help you to work through that skill together, and maybe practice it with someone. So let's say box breathing is yours, having someone maybe help guide you with box breathing. It's really comforting to have another person around you, even on the phone right now, if you can't be with someone, FaceTime, whatever it is, to have another person present helping you if you feel safe and comfortable with them.
I'm just going to add something as well. Great point, Alessia. I also think, one thing that we talked about at the beginning also is also normalizing it. It's a lot of the times there's a lot going on for us, and it can be overwhelming. And the last thing that we want to do is deal with it. So we try to avoid it sometimes, and it's not always helpful, but to recognize that it's normal to be feeling this way when there's so much stuff going on and there's so much on your plate. It's normal to feel overwhelmed and feel like it's tough and it's a hard time, but also engaging in some self-compassion, I think, is really important. So telling yourself, that it is okay to feel this way. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. That it is okay to feel this way, and that that you're trying your best with what you have going on, and that you're going to try to engage in these coping mechanisms and these coping techniques that we've provided with you, that you're doing your best with what you have. And so I think that can also help, because sometimes we can be really self-critical when we feel like we can't keep up with everything and we can't be our best supporter. So also I think that is a really important piece as well.
We have another question here. What do you do if the emotion is so intense or the situation is so intense that something like paced breathing won't work?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, paced breathing might not be your go-to option if something is feeling that intense. I would personally say that's when I would use more of the maybe more intense techniques like the cold, something that's like a full body. So the intense exercise would be a good one. I don't know, Mona, am I making sense by saying that?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. Even I think also anchoring can also help as well. Like grounding yourself and centering yourself, as difficult as it may be in that moment, but like reconnecting with your body, realizing that you have control over your body. I think a lot of the times when we're overwhelmed with emotion, we kind of forget that we're in control of our body. And so just moving your body around, kind of even going on that brisk walk or going for a walk with, let's say, some like a partner or something to kind of have that support with you as well, can also be helpful.
Even with the intense exercise piece, literally just jumping up and down, you might think it's a little ridiculous to do, but even just moving your arms around and just getting in touch with like that, your body is moving with you, is really helpful, and that you could just do wherever you are at any moment. I hope that helps.
If I can add to that briefly, so I'm not going
Please.
to show my face this time. Anything that overwhelms our senses can be extremely helpful. So it's not, I mean, the cold, the intense breathing, even like putting a can of something cold on your neck can do the trick. Putting something spicy or sour in your mouth can do the trick. Anything that makes you have to bring your attention to something else, even if it's for a couple of seconds, can be enough to help kind of defuse you or detach you from the intense emotion that you're feeling. Never to ignore or distract, or I guess, yes, to distract, but never to ignore or push away the emotion or invalidate it, but rather to give you the space that you need so that you can then process what's going on a little bit more effectively and decide what you want to do about it.
Oh, is that it? Sorry,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that was it. I do have one more question, but I want to preface this by saying that it's outside of our scope as psychologists and psychotherapists and psychotherapy students to answer this question. But if you have any thoughts about it, I think that it would be helpful. How do we know when medication is an appropriate option, or when we should consult our physicians about medication?
That's a really good question. And I think it's one that maybe is not asked enough because there's a lot of stigma still even around medication. Definitely, I would say, as you're saying, talk to your doctor, because it's outside of our scope. And we would never say we recommend or don't recommend medication for someone. But if you feel like that is a viable option for you, and that maybe the distress tolerance techniques or things that you're trying to do to cope are not feeling like they're enough, or that just that things are feeling very overwhelming, I would say that would be maybe an appropriate time to have a conversation with whoever your GP is, a medical professional for sure.
Yeah, definitely. To add on to that, like if that is something that you are interested in, like Alessia said and Thessum said, unfortunately, it is out of our scope of practice. But reaching out to your general practitioner, it's always a viable idea. And then even to then, if you are on medication and you feel like even then it's still difficult to sometimes manage these emotions, to incorporate some of these techniques that we have provided and use them in unison can actually sometimes be really helpful. So that's also another kind of option as well.
Do you have any tips for how we can communicate our emotions in a constructive way to others?
Yes. I'm just trying to think about friends versus like romantic partners. But I guess the best way to do that is to frame it from the perspective of how you're feeling, as opposed to putting the emotion on someone. I guess I'm looking at this in like a conflict kind of situation where you're using like the I feel kind of statements. I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
Could you elaborate on that, Alessia?
Okay, yeah. So when you use statements like I feel, you're owning the emotion, and it's owning how you feel, you're being vulnerable about it. And you're not placing blame on anyone for making you feel a type of way. And you're owning that this is an emotion that's just coming up for me, and it's okay that it's coming up for me, but you're being honest and vulnerable and just real with expressing that it's actually coming up for you. So is the question, how do you communicate it in a respectful way to others?
In an effective way. So I imagine
Okay.
respect falls into that.
Right. So I guess in an effective way is by owning it and having checked in with maybe some awareness about where that might be coming from for you. And you might not know why, and that's okay. And you can say, I don't know why this is coming up, but this is an emotion I have. And it's a very real one.
Yeah, I agree with what Alessia said, especially making sure that you're not putting the onus on the other individual, because sometimes that can make it even harder, but trying to really emphasize the way that you're feeling, and obviously giving some context as to why you may be feeling that way, because it is sometimes hard to be vulnerable and express how we're feeling, but to try to be open, honest, and hopefully that other person will be responsive to it.
Sometimes what can happen is that our emotions make us feel vulnerability. And for the most part, we don't like to feel vulnerability. And so what we'll do is we'll respond in a somewhat defensive way. And so what's actually coming out is that secondary emotion that I had referred to before, instead of the primary one that's making us feel vulnerable, right? And so it's not about you forgetting to buy the milk. It's about how I'm afraid that you don't love me enough. Right. And so it's helpful when we can be in touch with our emotions enough to actually share them in the moment. The other thing that can often happen, and I think a lot of us are socialized this way, is to ignore our emotions or to think that they're not important or they're not valid, especially when it comes to things like anger. And so when we're frustrated by something, instead of expressing our frustration, we'll just kind of push it down, ignore it, try to avoid dealing with the situation until it builds. And then all of a sudden we are freaking out about the milk when it's not actually about that at all. It's about the series of events that have taken place that we didn't address in the first place. And so what can make us be a little bit more effective in how we communicate our emotions is to do it in a timely way. Ideally, not when we're so overwhelmed that it's not going to come out effectively, but rather when we are ready to actually communicate how we're feeling, to do it in a timely way, so that it's not about the 10 things that happened over the past year. It's about what happened yesterday and how can we resolve that. And sometimes these situations don't actually have a resolution. So every time we have a conversation about how we're feeling, there may or may not be change involved in that. But simply the sharing of that emotion and the sharing of the need helps us connect more, helps us trust more. And that in and of itself can make a difference in the quality of our relationships, and hopefully in how the people we have relationships with understand us and how we understand them. I think the last thing I would add to that is that we need to be ready, number one, for people to not really care or be interested in meeting our needs. And also that people may or may not change. We can't control other people, and we can't control other people's emotions, just like others can't control how we feel or what we do. And so all we can do is share, and then it's up to the other person to respond. But people might not know how to respond, and so they may have a desire to do so. They may want to make it better or to fix it or to make us happy or all those lovely things. But if we can't articulate what it is that we need from them in those moments, then they can't read our minds, even though we would love for people to be able to read our minds and just meet our needs. And so being able to express like, hey, I don't need you to fix this right now. I just need you to sit with me, or I just need a hug, or I need you to go get me ice cream, or I need you to help me problem solve this thing so we can figure it out together. People don't know unless you ask. People don't know unless you tell them. And so part of that communication of emotions is also communicating what you need in response to that, and recognizing that you may or may not then get what you're hoping for out of it.
I think that's a really important part of it too. Yeah. Is that it might not be what you expect the reaction to be to.
That is the end of the questions.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time on a Thursday. Oh, had to think of the day, Thursday night to join us for this. Awesome.
Thank you guys so much. Really, really appreciate it.